You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. Several law enforcement agencies across the country have decided to replace a popular model of pistol due to concerns about misfires. The guns have been reported to fire accidentally, even in their holsters. Washington's police academy earlier this year banned the firearm at all of its training facilities. It's a move that's drawn protest from several local police departments who say the gun is safe. In some cases, when agencies choose to replace these guns, they are not being sent to a landfill or a recycling center. Instead, they're being sold to dealers who may put them back into circulation for the public. That's the latest from a new report from Mother Jones and The Trace, a nonprofit newsroom covering gun violence in America. Ava Sasani reported this story, and she joins me now. Ava, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with this pistol, Sig Sauer P320. Why are law enforcement agencies concerned about it?
Yeah, so the P320 is an incredibly popular pistol. It is used by law enforcement. They have several federal contracts. And since the gun came on the market about a decade ago now, there have been these increased number of allegations saying that the gun can fire on its own. Um, Originally, pretty soon after the gun was released, there were allegations that the gun fired when dropped. And more recently, we've seen a surge of reports that even when the gun is holstered, or the user is not touching the trigger, that the gun can fire and cause accidents and injuries, and in one case, a death. So with this increased number of allegations, of course, with a gun, you're always going to have safety concerns, but there's been a more watchful eye as these numbers are going up.
How many people that we know of have been injured by accidental discharges of a P320?
So that we know of so far, it's over 110 injuries.
And this has been litigated. The company has gone to court to defend itself. What have they said?
So Sig Sauer has maintained that these allegations are basically all user error. The company says that the gun is safe to use. They've maintained that the incidents that we're talking about here, the allegations that the trigger fired unexpectedly, were just an issue of mishandling or, again, user error.
And this is an incredibly popular weapon, right? How common is the P320, the Sig Sauer P320?
So it's one of the most popular handguns in the country. The P320 is especially popular among law enforcement officers. It's been used by more than 1,000 law enforcement agencies across the country.
What is going on with these misfires? I mean, why would a Sig Sauer be more likely to misfire than another gun? And by the way, is that accurate? I mean, are the allegations that it is more likely to misfire than another model of gun?
Yeah, so we don't really know because, again, Sig Sauer has maintained that their guns are safe to use. It's difficult to litigate exactly what the mechanical issues are, but they have maintained that the trigger is fine. In the course of our reporting, we found law enforcement agencies like the Denver Police Department did their own independent testing and found that the trigger is more sensitive than other guns, but it's difficult to say with any certainty if this gun is more dangerous. I think the thing that we are most interested in is the fact that the perception of the gun potentially being dangerous was enough to precipitate all of these law enforcement agencies that we spoke to really moving out of an abundance of caution and stopping to use the weapon. But the fact that again, abundance of caution is a phrase that kept coming up in these conversations, it does not extend to civilian gun buyers.
If a piece of consumer equipment, like a crib or an airbag, has safety concerns, there are federal agencies that look into this, they do testing, and they would force a recall if there was something proven to be problematic or unsafe about the product. Why does that not happen with this gun? Like, why are we having to speculate and kind of look at individual police agencies doing independent investigations? Why is there not sort of a overall look from a federal regulatory agency at the safety of this gun?
Yeah, it's a good question. Uh, the firearms industry, we have to remember, is not regulated in the same way that other consumer goods are. There is no federal agency that looks at firearms in that way that other consumer goods are regulated. We have um, the ATF, but because of Second Amendment lobbying and gun rights lobbying, it's incredibly hard to sue firearms manufacturers. So, and because of that, there is no federal agency that is regulating guns like the P320 as you would have, consumer regulations and consumer protections for things like a crib or any other thing you can buy.
Your story is titled A Gun Deemed Too Dangerous for Cops But Fine for Civilians. And so the basic deal here is we have departments across the country deciding these guns are not right for us in some cases. And then these guns get put back into the civilian market. How does that happen, Ava?
Yeah, so it's this process that we've known about for a while where essentially a law enforcement agency, when it's time to upgrade or when they decide they want new guns, similar to how you would trade in an old car and then the value of your used car would go towards the new one, law enforcement agencies will very often do that with firearms and related weapons. So if I am a law enforcement agency and I'm worried about the P320 and I just out of an abundance of caution want to have my officers have a new gun, I'll go to the firearm seller that sold me the P320s and say, "We will trade these in. You get a trade-in credit, and then you can essentially get a discount on the new weapons." So that's what we saw with agencies in Washington, like the Kitsap County Sheriff's Department and the Vancouver Police Department. So they're not directly putting them back on the civilian market, but indirectly with this trade-in process as kind of a middleman, um, you are essentially using the value of used guns to get a discount on the new weapons.
Did Kitsap County have any other option? I mean, if you want to get new service weapons and you're getting rid of the current ones, isn't the trade-in the way to go?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. So Kitsap County is a little bit unique because when they went to their county government, the sheriff basically said, "Hey, we're seeing all these reports and allegations about this gun. It seems unsafe. And out of an abundance of caution, we want to change and use new guns." The county government said, "Absolutely. We prioritize safety. We don't want you using potentially unsafe guns either. We will fund the purchase of new weapons, new equipments, and additionally, we will fund the destruction of the P320s because of the safety concerns." Now, when the sheriff was offered that to have the cost of destroying guns just covered by the county government, they actually declined and they said, "No, in order to save money for the county, we would prefer to trade in the old weapons." And for those P320s, they got just under $70,000. So it is, a sizable cost saving measure. But the question comes up of if you are saying that these guns are unsafe or allegedly unsafe, why you gotta wonder the cost benefit of trading those in.
What did the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office tell you or the sheriff tell you about that decision?
Yeah, so the sheriff's office told us that the county government had previously told them to try and cut costs and save money where possible. So even though here they offered to handle the cost of the destruction of the P320s, they again pointed to the financial benefits of trading in guns. That was kind of what we saw with most law enforcement agencies around the country. Is they said, look, it's better for our budgets to trade in. You get tens of thousands of dollars for trading in the old guns. And the the implication that we got, not from Kitsap, but from many of these law enforcement agencies, is it's not our business what happens after these guns go to a wholesaler or gun dealer. We don't know what they do with it, and that's to, for lack of a better phrasing, not our problem.
The 6-hour P320 has been banned by the Criminal Justice Training Commission, basically the police academy for Washington state. And this comes after an alleged misfiring incident at a training facility in Yakima. Now, a bunch of departments across the state have opposed this. So while we've been talking about Kitsap County deciding to move away from the P320, places like Bellevue PD, Kirkland PD, they're saying they believe in this weapon. They think it's the best option, and they're really upset that the training commission is no longer having recruits train on this weapon that is so common across departments. What did you learn about this decision to ban the P320 by the police academy and the response?
Yeah, we it was an interesting pushback. I think what we found most compelling is the training academy knew that the cost of replacing these incredibly popular weapons was going to put pressure on law enforcement agencies. They knew and they acknowledged in the report announcing the ban that it would be a fairly unpopular decision, and they did so anyway. So I think that was part of what motivated us to start looking into this, because in spite of these financial pressures, the decision to ban the gun was released. Um, the other thing that was relevant, I think, is, you see two different approaches to the P320. You see law enforcement agencies that sort of take a proactive approach and say, we are seeing reports of, police officers and other sheriff's deputies, all these different civilians even getting severely injured, in one case killed, by accidents involving a P320. And you see those departments acting proactively out of an abundance of caution and saying, before anything happens, before an accident happens, we are going to try and replace these weapons. And then the other thing you see is kind of a, well, we haven't had any problems with it, so we are going to assume that these weapons are fine. That was the thinking that we encountered with a lot of law enforcement agencies in Washington. I think the impression there was, we don't know what happened with those other allegations, but we've never had a problem with them. So we would rather not go through this expensive process of replacing the guns. You have to remember, too, that the legal ramifications of the police academy's decision to ban the P320 are complex and are still being sort of teased out right now. Bellevue's police chief brought this up actually at a training commission meeting a couple months ago. Their officers use the P320 currently. So when the chief goes to events like, let's say, a graduation at the police academy, it's unclear if he, as an officer, is allowed to bring his sidearm, the P320, onto those campuses, if he has to find a replacement, if he has to leave the gun in the car. There's just a bunch of these sticky legal questions that are, being posed to these agencies that currently carry the P320 in Washington, that we haven't really understood in the few months since the ban was announced.
Yeah, it's just interesting that Washington State has become such a testing ground for these arguments for and against the P320. I will quote from a King 5 report on the Criminal Justice Training Commission's ban of the P320. This is from emails that King 5 was able to get through public records requests. This is a Kirkland police lieutenant writing to the CJTC's task force studying the P320. And this lieutenant says, quote, "We have made the decision and stand by our choice of the SIG P320. SIG has proved it cannot fire without a trigger pull." This is writing in a January email to Bellevue and Marysville police. And Marysville and Bellevue also carry the P320s still. Finally, Ava, I just want to kind of circle back to this decision by Kitsap County to phase out the P320, but then to sell these guns back to a dealer. Is it the department's responsibility to decide what happens to those guns next? I suppose this is a really popular gun. Dealers want them. They're popular with consumers. The department is saying it's fiscally responsible to recoup some of those costs by trading them in. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, so I think many of them would say, many of the agencies that did trade in would say there is no problem. They do not have a duty to regulate what guns are available on the civilian and secondhand market. But I think something that comes up in our reporting is, yes, you have this responsibility to cut costs, as Kitsap County did, to reduce the burden on taxpayer dollars. But given that the firearms industry is so unregulated, I think it begs the question, do law enforcement officials also have a responsibility to not put these potentially dangerous weapons, and that's dangerous by their own appraisal, into a market where civilian gun buyers could purchase them, right? Technically, no, they are not responsible. These law enforcement agencies are not responsible for dictating what guns can and cannot be sold. But you gotta wonder, is there a more nebulous responsibility to think about where their old weapons are going to end up?
Ava Sasani is the assistant editor of the Data Hub, an initiative by The Trace, the only newsroom dedicated to reporting on gun violence in the U.S. She's also the co-author of the story "A Gun Deemed Too Dangerous for Cops But Fine for Civilians," which was reported in partnership with Mother Jones. Ava, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.